Tread lightly when you listen to what I'm about to tell you, because once these names and places enter your head, they do not leave quietly. I came to Salem thinking I would gather dates and walk a tidy path through the past. Snow clung to clapboard houses, a bell tolled across the harbor, and my notebook felt heavier with every page I turned. From the first step, the town behaved like a stage lit by a low and difficult moon. History threaded itself through salt air and chimney smoke, and each story grew cold to the touch. Step back with me to 1692. Hear the brittle creak of a meeting-house pew. Smell lamp oil and wet wool. Feel the chill carried off the Atlantic pulling at the seams of a frightened community. Why do these trials still live in the marrow of this place after more than 3 centuries? Because fear builds rooms where daylight struggles to enter, and once those rooms are built, they rarely empty. I started at the beginning, in a village splitting at the root. Salem was not one place then, but 2. A seaport growing bolder by the year, and a farming settlement shouldering debt, drought, and sermons that bit like iron. Reverend Samuel Parris preached thunder over a congregation worn by hard fields and harder winters. In his parsonage, his young daughter and niece seized and cried out, their bodies racked by something no one could name. A Caribbean woman, Tituba, cooked in the kitchen.
Stories followed her like curious children. After the fits began, those stories turned to accusations. On rough benches, men whispered intentions and grievances that had little to do with heaven. Old grudges guided hands as surely as any scripture. Families knotted by years of boundary disputes and inheritance quarrels saw a new way to settle old scores. Across low tables, mothers pressed hands to foreheads slick with fever, wondering if smallpox had snuck under the door or if the devil had done the same. Wolves padded the tree line on winter nights. Smoke from hearths hung heavy in the cold, and the meeting house felt more like a courtroom with every tick of the clock. I ran my finger along a record written in a steady 17th century hand and could almost hear the quill scratch, the judgment forming in the scratch of ink. It grew into a hunt. The first to fall into the net were women already pushed to the edge. Sarah Good, who begged for food and slept under roofs that sagged. Sarah Osborne, who dared defy inheritance customs. And Tituba, who survived by telling what the court wished to hear. Testimony became theater. Girls gasped, pointed, collapsed. The courtroom echoed with their cries, their breathy insistence that specters clawed at them. Spectral evidence, dreams, visions, things unseen, slid onto the scales like lead. I read the words aloud in a quiet room at the archive, my voice sounding thin against that weight. Whispers traveled faster than horses. By spring, jail cells filled with those the town had once greeted by name. Rebecca Nurse, revered for piety, watched the order of her days dissolve in chains. A cart rumbled toward a rocky rise beyond the village, Proctor's Ledge, where a wind from the sea could be cruel even in summer. There, the rope did its work, coarse against raw skin. Plank and ladder thudded as feet shifted and braced. In jail, ankles swelled where irons bit through skin. The dark smelled of tallow and damp straw. One man, Giles Corey, refused the jury, refused the shape of the law as it had been broken. They pressed him with stones in a muddy field. He lay there 3 days, asked for more weight, and silence spread across the village like ash. By autumn, 19 had been hanged. Blood did not pool in the earth so much as seep into memory. Names stuck to the rafters of homes like webs: Proctor, Nurse, Howe, Bishop, Parker, Carrier. After the executions, neighbors swore they heard footsteps on crushed grass where no one walked. A window unlatching in a windless room. A kettle lid set gently on iron after everyone had fallen asleep. You can say those sounds came from grief and guilt, that any town would creak under such pressure. Still, courthouses fall quiet in a certain way after such days. In Salem, the quiet felt like a held breath that never fully released. That hush followed me into the old Burying Point Cemetery. Slate markers leaned like tired shoulders. Lichen crept along edges, carved 3 centuries back. A salt lean wind moved through bare branches, a whisper under the hushed traffic along Charter Street. I trailed my glove across a cold stone, the carved death's head grinning at February light, as if it were a joke only the dead understood. A caretaker in a wool cap closed a gate behind him and told me a story without asking for an audience. He came early some mornings to find coins stacked on a marker for a woman who never had any to spare in life. No one in the family had visited that week. He said nothing about ghosts. He talked about small acts of remembrance that refused to be claimed. Past the cemetery, the witch house sat with its black timber and steep gables like a brow furrowed in thought. Judge Jonathan Corwin's home, where decisions took shape that bent lives. The doorway swallowed me whole. Floorboards complained under every step, loud as if to say, "I hear you." The air tasted of old wood, wax, and something faintly medicinal, as though herbs had been hung to dry and never taken down. I stood in a room with a table set for judgment, inkwell, quill, a ledger replica. The docent's voice softened as she described examinations held here. "Out of respect," she said, "they kept the shades low in winter. Sunlight laid a thin band along the table edge, and dust motes turned like quiet planets." She told me a closing shift story of footsteps circling the room when she knew she had locked the front door and checked the back twice. Locals nearby offered other accounts. A bartender on Essex Street laughed with a throat that had seen too many late nights and admitted that on slow afternoons, a glass would sometimes travel 3 inches without a hand near it. Not fast, not dramatic, just a measured glide, as if remembering the pull of a bar where someone once waited and never returned. A guide whose tours filled sidewalks in October spoke low when we stood aside in January. At the Witch Trials Memorial, the benches felt warmer than the air, even when the stones smelled of ice. She had watched visitors lay rosemary and sea wind lift the leaves off and place one on a lap unerringly. Though no breeze touched their hair, she shrugged and asked if I believed it. When I took the road out, dusk fell like a hood. The harbor bells had already fallen quiet. Stores shut their doors with a finality that excluded argument. The town had done its best to live with its own past. Galleries, museums, plaques with sober words. Still, night made the place smaller, the streets narrower, the history taller. In the motel, my radiator rattled a dry tune, and the window hummed with the distant rush of cars. Sleep came quick and broke quicker. My dreams filled with the quick scratch of quills and boots on gravel.
At 3 in the morning, a floor above me, which I knew to be empty, gave off a sequence of steps. 1, 2, a pause, then a few more as if someone changed their mind mid-stride. Morning did not scatter the feeling. Every site I had visited threaded itself through the day. The ridge where the hangings took place, the parsonage site like a bruise under snow, the black house with its stubborn angles. Fear had worked here like a craftsman, planning down the edges of friends until they fit neatly into accusation.
Officials repented later, jurors wept, ministers wrote apologies. Yet apologies did not dilute the residue. It stayed in the air above the courthouse sites, in stones that warmed and cooled and warmed again. Are those presences we sense at the cemetery and the witch house, the dead themselves, or the return of a lesson etched so deeply into the town that it can no longer fade? If you follow me to the next place, hold on to the lesson Salem offers. Reason falters when panic hands it a list of names. Some towns carry the echo of that failure like a bell that never quite stops ringing. Our journey continues along that line to another American location that wears the past like a second skin, where hallways keep their own counsel and the ground remembers the weight of stories. Subscribe, bring a steady light, and come ready to listen. We'll walk together into another house where history speaks in its particular voice and does not care if night has already settled.
Dzięki za oglądanie.